Now hear me out. One of the most important things you can do for your equity-denied communities is to learn trauma therapy. And this is evidence-based. There's excellent research demonstrating that for every adverse childhood experience a kid has, their adult risk of physical, psychological, and social ill health exponentially rises for every condition measured. So what's the best intervention? Obviously, prevention. So anything that can modify the risks for these kids is crucial. And secondary prevention is trauma therapy. We can all do this. These skills are easy to learn and very effective. So I've been a GP for over 20 years, and I work primarily as a trauma therapist now. Because my community practice was in an equity-deserving community with very high ACE scores or high numbers of adverse childhood experiences. Once I started to learn how to do trauma therapy, the first modality was accelerated resolution therapy. I recognized that all of their physical health also changed. So somebody with diabetes and their hemoglobin A1C was in the 14-15 range for years. We did one session of trauma therapy where she was able to leave behind some significant abuse, and her A1C that I measured next was 8. It's hard to care about your physical body when you're trying to dissociate from it. I now work as a trauma therapist as well as a family doctor at the Refugee Health Clinic. Refugees almost ubiquitously arrive with significant event trauma and often complex trauma from what they've been through. I also work as a consultant in the adult addictions team because so much substance use is a person trying to shift their nervous system state to something that's more preferred, even if the substance isn't, because they lack other skills that we could be teaching them. And this is why I'm such a huge fan of somatic or body-based work. There are two kinds of trauma therapies. One is cognitive or top-down, and one is somatic or bottom-up. And we're all told that CBT is the gold standard for every mental health concern, but it's not the best for trauma because you can't think your way out of an amygdala-based reflex response. So what should you learn? It's overwhelming. There is an entire alphabet soup of trauma therapies out there. The practical way to do it is to model it based on the work of Dr. Judith Herman. There are 3 phases to trauma recovery. The first stage is establishing safety. And what that means is we're trying to shift the nervous system away from fight and flight or high activation or freeze, low activation responses. You can find out more about this in my book, The Modern Trauma Toolkit. So skills that are really helpful at this stage are mostly somatic because you are learning biofeedback and neurofeedback and neuroplasticity with how to change your own nervous system state. In particular, I love havening and tapping at this stage. What's next for phase 2 is actual trauma processing. And what you're doing is you're rewiring the associations to the traumatic event or relationships in the amygdala. And those associations look like emotions, physical sensations, and context. It's stored in there to try to keep you safe in the future. It's protective. And what we do is we make it more neutral. So we associate it with new emotions and physical sensations so that it's no longer as triggering. My favorite tool at this stage is accelerated resolution therapy, a cousin of EMDR, and it's often a single session treatment, which feels like magic. The third stage is reconnecting to who you want to be. So who are you not driven by trauma responses? And that takes time to figure out. I love a therapy called NARM, or the Neuroaffective Relational Model, but internal family systems is incredibly helpful at this stage. There are so many different ways to explore this existential, self-actualized identity that we would want to be. Both PTSD and complex trauma are treatable conditions, and you can do that. First, you need to identify what complex trauma even looks like because it's not in the DSM, and then just tackle 1 or 2 therapeutic options that you can learn yourself and teach in your office. It's also good for the trauma that we hold being GPs.